Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's first edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show this evening, prison escapes. Just how rife is it, and who makes it happen? Our panel of experts for this evening weighs in amid calls for heads to roll following murderer Thabo Bester's spectacular escape from what is regarded as one of the most secure prisons in South Africa. We also look at the Vladimir Putin hot potato. We look at the prospects of the Russian president being arrested when he attends the BRICS summit in a few months' time. The Watchdog starts now. The Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union has called for top prison officials to be investigated and held accountable for the escape of the so-called Facebook rapist Thabo Bester from a Mangaung prison. Police are currently searching for the murderer and rapist. He escaped after his prison cell was torched in what was initially thought to be a suicide. An autopsy has failed to match the DNA of the dead body with that of Bester. This emerged after apparent pictures of Bester were posted on social media. Police believe that Bester's escape was well organized.
We are dealing with a complex type of an investigation because our preliminary investigation indicates to us that this is an organized crime, and hence our organized crime investigations unit are leading investigations into this particular matter. So it was quite important that us as the SAPS conduct a thorough investigation into this case to close all the gaps that exist, to ensure also that we have a watertight case, but most importantly that we mobilize all the resources to apprehend this fugitive of justice, to apprehend obviously those who have facilitated the escape from lawful custody, as well as those who have facilitated and assisted this particular fugitive to fake his own death.
Linda Mata, spokesperson for the South African Police Service. Well, joining me now is Professor Nimala Gopal from the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Department of Criminology and Forensic Studies. We also have Professor Thabiso Mashaba from UNISA's Department of Penology. Good evening to both of you. Profs, thank you so much for your time. Okay, looks like we're having problems with those lines. We're going to try and re-establish them. Prof. Mashaba, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you, Vuyo.
Well, the police say this was a well-organized escape. Prof. Mashaba, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm saying, well, according to the police spokesperson, this appears to have the Thabo Bester's escape appears to have been well organized. That shouldn't come as a surprise, or does it?
Yes, it doesn't come as a surprise because it is impossible that you can get a body of someone else in the center like the Mangaung Correctional Center. Mangaung Correctional Center is one of the most secure centers in South Africa, and then it's having all the electronic equipment in terms of the safety. So I believe that this was well organized, a plan that might include correctional officials and other people from the outside world. So it was a planned, well-planned and organized escape. But the question, Vuyo, is that who is the body was found in correctional center? That is the question. And the other question that we have to ask ourselves is that, are there any arrangements such as this that are happening in our correctional centers?
Now, from what you know, Prof, from previous cases of escape and so on, how do these things happen? Is it a prisoner who then approaches, officials, and then with the assistance of other people? What sort of things do they then do? How does it all work from what you know?
In South African correctional system, we have the 5 most daring prison escapes. And then the first one, it was the one of Ananias Martin, who used Vaseline to escape, of which we are still asking ourselves whether it is possible for someone to use Vaseline to escape. And then the second one, it was 20 awaiting trial inmates who escaped through the arrangement of the transport. And the third one, it was the escaping through swapping identification badge. It was happened at St. Albans Correctional Center. And then the fourth escape that we think that it was daring in South Africa, it was the one of the prisoner who cut the toilet and make a hole and escape through the hole of the toilet. It happened at KZN and the Correctional Center. And then the fifth one, it was when the prisoner escaped through digging at the toilet. And then they dig their cell and then they manage to escape. So this one is totally different from this fight. That is why I wanted to explain this fight, because this one was well organized, and then I believe that there is a lot of logistical arrangement on this one. When I'm talking about the logistical arrangement, I'm talking about the issue of money. There is a bribery that took place in this one. And then there is a possibility that senior officials, maybe they contributed to this. And I believe that the external world also contributed to this. So in other words, this is the syndicate arrangement, and then it was well planned. I've been visiting Mangaung Correctional Center for several times, and I'm aware of the security, and there's no way under those circumstances that an inmate can be able to escape. So I believe that this is a syndicate, well organized, and there's a lot of bribery, and if this case can be properly investigated, we are going to have thorough information and the people who contributed to this escape.
Professor Gopal, what do you make of this episode?
Well, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, I think first of all, it's now become a household conversation in the first instance. It's really bizarre. And I want to agree that it is highly organized. There's a syndicate or syndicates that are involved, not just in Thabo Bester's case, but I think in the other prison escapes as well. Because the critical question to ask is how is it that a particular profile of prisoner or inmate is able to escape versus those who are unable to escape? And I want to agree again that there is, I think there's large amounts of monies that are exchanged. So those who are able to afford the economics are able to do so more easily. In addition to that, I think, there's no doubt, undoubtedly, it is prison officials who are part of this entire plan, because it just doesn't make any sense that your prisoners escape. And let's look at Thabo Bester, for example. With high sophisticated CCTV cameras, etc., and not a single guard was able to detect that he was exiting the prison. That just doesn't make any sense.
Expand, Prof, please, if you will, on the profile, the particular profile issue that you've just raised.
So when I say the profile, it's usually those who are linked to gangs, those who are linked to monies, syndicates. Of course, the syndicates have huge amounts of monies. And in this case, in all probability, the girlfriend was involved. And given her own profession, and again, I say in all probability, there was monies that were exchanged. So she could have financed this operation.
typically, how do people sort of smuggle, these amounts of money, whether into prison, or how do they pay the officials that they bribe?
So, of course, there's various ways in which you can do that. One of it is just transact in cash. So there's no footprint, there's no electronic footprint in terms of monies that are exchanged. So either cash, or you can create accounts on, friends, relatives, names, and it's almost like the way in which you would launder money. Mm-hmm. So it's a very similar strategy to use, and it's not difficult at all for monies to exchange hands. It's absolutely not difficult in today's modern world, mm-hmm. without leaving any traces.
Professor Mashaba, I just got some numbers from correctional services who say that the number of escapes has decreased from 117 in 2020-2021 financial year to 22 in the 2021-2022 financial year, which the spokesperson says translates to a decrease of 95 escapes, which is 81%. And this, he says, is attributed to the commitment of security personnel, but also the implementation of standard operating procedures and gang combating strategy. In other words, what Singabako says here is that they have really done well over the past couple of years to reduce escapes. Prof. Mashaba?
Yes, I think, Buyo, I will agree with the spokesperson from the Department of Correctional Services. The best important thing is to give credit where it's due. The South African prisons are safe from escape. Because if you can look at this financial year, it's only 22 escapes, and then it is the lowest in the past 27 years, which means that escapes are decreasing gradually. And I would like to agree with the spokesperson. The department is doing well in terms of the security procedures that implemented within correctional centers, the gang management strategies. Those strategies are working. However, this case of Thabo will try to provide a new precedent on the way high-profile offenders escape from correctional centers. And the issue of escape from correctional centers is there. Even one of the most secure correctional centers in the world, Alcatraz prison, in 1962, 3 offenders managed to escape from that prison. And remember, the prison was 1.25 miles from San Francisco, and it was regarded as the most safest prison in the world. So the issue of escape will take place in our correctional centers. However, now the department is doing the right approaches. They are implementing the right strategies to prevent escape in South African correctional centers. And we need to take into consideration the offender population. The population for now, including awaiting trial detainees, is around 140,000. So we've got 248 correctional centers, which means that if 22 offenders escape in one financial year out of that number, we are on the right track, because we are talking about the 1% of the population. So I would like to agree with the spokesperson of the department in terms of the strategies that they've implemented this far.
Do you also agree, Prof. Gopal?
No, not necessarily. I think if we have one prisoner who escapes, it's one too many, because that prisoner could have could be in for a very serious offense, and he or she escapes, and we are letting loose a serious criminal into society. So I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think given the kind of security that we find in prisons, I personally, I can't fathom out how we allow this to happen.
how do you think this is being allowed to happen? In other words, what are those in charge or in power to do something, or those who have powers to do something about it? What are they not doing?
So I think, first of all, when I say how do we allow it to happen, it means it's a human error. So when it's a human error, it means that human beings or the wardens are not doing something that's right. And this is a kind of space where you've got to, be on high alert. Discipline has to be amongst the wardens and amongst any other prison official has to be 120% if we can achieve something called 120%. Anything short of that is going to cost us, and cost us severely, like we've seen in the recent past. And I think that is just not acceptable in a prison situation. If we look at the population, the prison population, compared to, as Professor Mashaba has mentioned, if we look at the prison population, it's not a very high population. So, and I'm quite certain that the resources we have within prisons is adequate for us to make sure that we have no escapees. And we should actually, that should be the motto of correctional services, 0% escapees.
Prof. Mashaba, I mean, the issue of the lack of overcrowding and under-resourcing, and under-resourcing some, unions like POPCRO, for example, raise this issue ever so often. How much of a contribution are those two factors making towards prison escapes?
No, I think that POPCRO is doing well because they are hands-on regarding the issue of the condition of the imprisonment in South Africa. And we must be aware that the department is trying with the recruitment strategies to deploy new correctional officials so that they can be able to assist in the case of security. And we need to take into consideration the fact that we are from COVID-20, we are from COVID-19, whereby in the last 3 years, the department did not manage to recruit the number that they were envisaged to recruit in terms of assisting the issue regarding security in correctional centers. There are issues like 9 days establishment, but I think that the department is trying to come up with the approaches so that they can ensure that there is a security and safety in our correctional centers. But so far, so good. POPCRO is hands-on. POPCRO is trying to assist the department to come up with the solutions on the problems regarding overcrowding.
But do they, as far as you know, look at their own members' contribution? Because in all likelihood, an officer who would have been bribed, as appears to have been the case on this Bester case, that person will, in all likelihood, be a member of POPCRO, isn't it?
Yes, I think that I had a relationship with POPCRO before, and the fortunate part of it, I was directly involved with developing some of the documents on the issue of the vision of the union in terms of the envisaged future correctional system in South Africa. As indicated, I think that there is a massive support from POPCRO. However, the Department of Correctional Services must try to come with the digitalized tool of trade. Because if we are talking about the issue of escapes, for example, Prof was saying that there must be zero tolerance towards the escape. But we must remember that in most cases, the case of escape can have various stakeholders. Even the community can assist offenders to escape from correctional centers. And then we must not shy away from the fact that there are contraband articles that offenders are using during the escape. There is this issue of cell phones in prison. Remember, you cannot just haphazardly escape from prison without plan. And our correctional centers are far from the cities. They are geographically far. For example, if you look at the center like Groentein in the side of Eastern Cape, is about 15 kilometers from the city. In other words, an inmate need to make the necessary arrangement for a getaway car to move him from the prison to the city so that they can. So it is not all about the failure from the correction side. We as the community, we also contribute. And the other thing is the contraband articles, especially the use of cell phones.
Prof. Gopal, the prisoners are not supposed to have cell phones, but if you look at WhatsApp groups and the like, you see, prisoners freely having conversations with the outside world. You see them forming part of conversations that are open. They don't hide the fact that they have cell phones and they communicate with the world.
Yes, and I think that's something that just also frustrates me. To me, it seems like it's lawless within the correctional services. So as you rightfully mentioned, that prisoners should not be in possession of cell phones. We hear about the cell phones in the public domain. We hear that something is being done about it. And yet at the same time, we hear about these WhatsApp groups and conversations with the outside world, etc. And I think in that way, it dilutes whatever promises the government or specifically the correctional services makes to the public. It just dilutes the entire argument. And really the lawlessness that we have in prisons, we've got to find a way to end it. Although I must quickly add that the lawlessness we find in prisons is what we find in South African society at the moment as well. So there's just so much of lawlessness that's going on in the country, and we've got to find some adequate and effective measures to start arresting this lawlessness.
Prof. Mashaba, doesn't it, if you take the issue of cell phones, sort of pour cold water to any claim that the system is correcting itself? In other words, there's a big commitment, effort being made in getting, in making things difficult for prisoners to escape. If the use of cell phones, for example, is as widespread, can anyone then claim that the system is indeed working?
I think that the Department of Correctional Service must try to come up with a preventing strategy, of which there are some legislation requirements, especially from ICASA. But Boyo, the reality is that there is a present economy, and there is a lot of money and a lot of smuggle, a lot of syndicate that are controlling the outside world while they are in correctional centers. And those people, they are using these advanced devices. Even the issue of the payment of particular individual who might be assisting in this case of Thabo, you'll find out those guys, they use cash sent through their cell phones, or else someone from outside was given a mandate to say that transfer this money to this kind of officials. So as long as we are having cell phones in our correctional centers, I think that there won't be a solution regarding contraband article. For example, with cell phones, someone can be able to get through the assistance of the official internally. Because the time you plan an escape, you don't just plan an escape now and try to escape tomorrow. Unfortunately, there is a proper planning regarding that. As indicated, there must be a getaway car. And those communications, they are taking place through the communication via cell phones. And we must not shy away from saying that some of correctional officials are gang members. They have a relationship with gangsters. So they assist the gangs regarding the violence. And we must remember that there is the Air Force gang in correctional centers. And then the modus operandi of that gang is to escape from prison. But we'll find the situation whereby some correctional officials, not all of them, are members of those gangs. Automatically, they will have to abide with the gang rules.
But to what extent are some perhaps not necessarily members of gangs, as in belong to those gangs, but then they get to be, whether it's blackmail or whether it's fear, that, I mean, they may be killed if they stand in the way of the gangs, and by so doing, of course, they get to execute, the programs or projects of the gangs, but they don't necessarily belong to the gangs themselves.
The issue of I visited one of the correctional centers recently at the other side of the Eastern Cape, and then I had a chat with inmates and correctional officials. This is what happened. If you recruit me to work in a space where inmates knows where the whereabouts, anything about myself, obviously I will be victimized, because through the cell phones, those inmates will be able to tell other gang members outside that Mataba is responsible for this unit, and then try to intimidate him so that he can cooperate with us to bring contraband articles. No one wants to lose his family, unfortunately. So I think that there is a lot of victimization from inside, whereby some correctional officials, they will be victimized by inmates. It's either you comply or your family will be victimized. That's one of the problem in many problems that I experience in our correctional centers.
Prof. Gopal, as far as you are aware, how alive are the authorities to the reality that there are all these sorts of possibilities, facing, especially members, officers of correctional services? In other words, where there can be blackmail, where they, how they get bribed, and whether anything is actually being done to actually prevent this from happening.
So we are, in all probability, the authorities are 90%, between 80 and 90% aware of exactly what the realities are like in prison, whether it's around prisoners or it's around employees of the prison, etc. I think that the question to ask, and you ask, what are they doing? In my humble opinion, not much. Because if they were doing much, then we would see more effective, we would see greater efficacy around reducing, for example, the issue of escaping from prison, or even, what you find in prison, the murders, the raping, etc., that goes on as a consequence of the 26s and the 28s within prisons. But I think what's really important for me as a criminologist is to find out, does the prison system have a good intelligence source? And in all probability, intelligence does exist. And to what extent are prison officials using their intelligence sources to stamp out this crime and corruption in a space where we should not expect it to happen? And I think also what's very important is to look at international benchmarks. We don't find what's happening in South Africa in international, well-organized, well-run international prisons. So I think we have some lessons to learn from well-run correctional services or prisons.
How do other jurisdictions you regard to be very effective in this? What do they do? What are the sort of things that they do, Prof. Gopal?
So I think the first, high on the list is a kind of employees that they recruit. and the employees that they recruit have to be exceptional employees. So that's the first one. The second one is to ensure that there is no relationship between employees and prison inmates. The third one is the discipline of both the inmates as well as the employees. And I think that really is a high ticket item, ensuring that we have discipline of the employees who then in turn discipline the inmates. And of course, we're in a country where we know that bribery and corruption is just so high on our list. So you would find in other countries, you won't find this kind of bribery and corruption that's so open, that's so widespread as well. So I think there's a whole range of factors that actually contributes to why some countries are more effective in terms of their prison systems versus the South African prison system.
Prof. Mashaba, how familiar are you with the gang combating strategy that the Correctional Services spokesperson was talking about?
Yeah, I think that 3 years back, I was invited. I was invited by the former National Commissioner during the discussion of the gang combating strategy. And then I believe that every stakeholder was invited within the correctional officials to take part in that gang strategy. However, we need to take into consideration that South African prison gangs are coming far. And then the modus operandi are totally different. That is why South African gangs are considered as the most notorious gangsters in the world. They are more structured as compared to other side of the world and the international world. For example, you get 26, unlike in USA, whereby the jurisdiction or the boundaries will determine the gang. In South Africa, the 26 are at every correctional center. The modus operandi are the same, and the rank system is the same. In other words, if the general of the 26 is transferred to the other correctional center at other province, he will retain the status of a general. So South African gangs are well-organized gangsters, but what has to be done, as Professor Gopal indicated, is the issue of intelligence. It is unfortunate that in our correctional centers, we don't have intelligence, people that can be able to try to understand thoroughly the modus operandi, the reaction of those gangs. Yes, theoretically you can understand that the big five intention is 1, 2, 3, 4. But however, when we don't have an approach within the center, there will be a problem. So briefly, South African gangs are well organized, and then we have a long way to go so that we can be able to combat gangsterism in our prison. And as indicated, there is a prison economy. And gangs, they deal with money, they deal with blood, they deal with sodomy, they deal with escape. So we need to up our game, not to providing the theoretical solution, but we need to provide practical solution.
Prof. Gopal, I mean, what if you were a person in charge on the back of this rather embarrassing episode of how Thabo Bester escaped prison, what would you do to send a message that something like this will never ever happen again?
So my first port of call would be to find out all the people that were on duty during the time of his escape and suspend them immediately while an investigation continues. And I think that would probably send some message that the Correctional Services is taking this seriously.
Professor Gopal, Professor Mashaba, thanks for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
After the break, the Vladimir Putin hot potato. We look at the prospects of the Russian president being arrested when he attends the BRICS summit in South Africa in a few months' time. DA leader John Steenhuisen has echoed calls for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be arrested. This despite warnings of nuclear threats against any country that would execute the arrest from the country's former president, Dmitry Medvedev. Last week, the International Criminal Court issued a warrant of arrest against the superpower's president for war crimes committed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine over a year ago. Steenhuisen says there must be equality before the law. He was speaking to the SABC ahead of the DA's elective conference.
My advice is you've got to be consistent and go back to first principles. The principle of the rule of law means that there's equality before the law, and South Africa is obliged to execute that. We haven't left the ICC. We've remained signatories. Mr. Putin must be arrested. Look, these are people that can barely win a war in Ukraine. They are, they're on the back foot continuously. I don't think that they're a threat to South Africa. And I think that it would be foolish of them to do so, because I think the international consequence would be too great for them to bear. So
But South Africa would suffer greatly, won't it?
Well, I don't see it happening. I mean,
okay.
I think it's a fantasy league argument, because I don't see it realistically happening.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Charles Singala, who is an international relations expert. Dr. Singala, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Do you think South Africa can even attempt something like this?
Well, thank you very much. Good evening to your viewers. It is a laughable matter. We can laugh like that, but many people have died in Ukraine and the Russia war. But looking at the history where we are coming from, you remember not long ago, President Thabo Bester was given a free space in South Africa, even though that the international community demanded for his arrest. It is very unlikely that South Africa will damage their relation with Russia, especially in the conference that they are hosting. It would have been a trap for them to invite him to host that BRICS nations conference just to come and arrest him. I don't think they will be that stupid to use that word to arrest him.
And that's really the point, Dr. Singala. I mean, isn't it? It's not about whether South Africa wants, but the consequences if they were even going to attempt something like that. Notwithstanding the leader of the officials' opposition's comment that they can't win a war in Ukraine, so they are not a threat to South Africa.
Well, that is true. I mean, the leader of the opposition, DA, can have those sentiments, but I think he is lacking the wisdom of understanding the conflicts that are in between those two countries, and as well as the elements of that war. The impact is devastating. In fact, the ISIS has been very careless in terms of issuing that. It is a victory for the people of Ukraine. Since they are not part of the ICC, they had to converse among 43 member states who are signatories of International Criminal Court. Of course, they were denied that chance by South Africa because of South Africa's position in terms of the war between Russia and Ukraine, or rather the invasion of war in Ukraine. But we can see the speech from President Putin. This type of escalation actually exacerbates the war in Ukraine. It's not coming to an end. What the international community should have done, especially the ISIS, is to provide the head of state and government for both two countries and other nations to see how well they can resolve this. Russia is not a small country like South Africa or Zimbabwe or Zambia. It's a big country, and it demands a bigger space in terms of military and influence. And this is the first time that one of the member states of the United Nations Security Council has actually been indicted to the ISIS. The prospects of this are very slim. We can see the threats as well that Russia has issued, that trying or attempting to arrest President Putin to be the declaration of a war and the unleashing of nuclear weapons Of course, already he has suspended the treaty which they signed with the United States of America in order not to use those nuclear weapons. So many of deaths and the impact on the economic activities of the world will escalate instead of reducing.
And I mean, we saw the meeting between the Russian and Chinese president last week, clearly demonstrating to the world that they are in this together.
Of course, they're in bed together. Looking at the relationships, the trade wars that the United States of America had with China, the COVID pandemic, which they said it was initiated by the Chinese government, but also the Chinese government mentions that it's the CIA who planted the virus in Wuhan province. So if you combine Russia and China, honestly, it's not that, you are playing with a child, you are playing with fire as a nation. Yes, we would like to stop and end the war in Ukraine. It has been more than a year and many lives has been lost. But as a nation and as a world where we proclaim and preach peace, that why can't the two leaders they sit together and find an amicable solution? These wars which they're discussing in terms of the sanctions, we can see how the economical impact, including in the United Kingdom, they are complaining about their inflation and the devaluation, the high cost of living, both even in the United States of America. So it is impacting them. It is high time that they have to reconsider in terms of fueling the war rather than trying to end the war. President Putin, I think, is steadfast. Even if we condemn him, we will all rise up in the world and condemn him. I don't think he's going to back up. He knows exactly where he's standing in the world in terms of this conflict. In fact, he mentioned in his 1 hour, 32-minute speech, he was not actually talking about Ukraine and how bad they are. He actually was attacking that this war in Ukraine has been exacerbated or escalated by NATO and the United States of America. And these are the ones who are fighting actually on the soil of Ukraine.
And of course, I mean, South Africa knows who to listen to, between its BRICS allies and, of course, America and its allies.
Of course, that is very clear. You remember the occasion of the invitation of President Cyril Ramaphosa to the United States of America to convince him to tell his government to readdress his foreign policy in terms of Russia and Ukraine war. He refused tentatively that, we are a nation that promotes peace in the world. We cannot take sides or condemn what has happened to Russia. Russia has got its own basis of escalating that war in Ukraine. Ukraine as well has got its own reasons of why Russia has invaded them. So it is when they say, the African says, when the two elephants are fighting, the grass suffers. And indeed, the people of Ukraine have suffered dearly. Not only the people of Ukraine, but the rest of the world has been affected. Look at our economic activities on the southern part of Africa. Here in Zambia as well, we can't control our currency. South Africa as well can't control the dollar and the rand currency. It's because of the war in that nation and the escalation which is fueling. And NATO as well as the West, United States of America, they are actually fueling this war because they are benefactors of these wars in supplying arms and ammunitions, which they have continued. By now, more than a year since the war started in Ukraine, we should have seen some end to the war. But now this historic moment of the ISIS, issuing that warrant of arrest, to the most feared person in the world at the moment in terms of military muscle, it is a laughable matter and unprecedented in the history of our world.
And of course, I mean, a lot of people have been pointing out talking about the hypocrisy of a United States that wants a Putin arrested for what is happening in Ukraine, yet they themselves are guilty of similar atrocities in Africa and elsewhere. And the fact that they have been doing that for a very long time with impunity.
Of course, and nobody has ever issued a warrant of arrest either to former President Barack Obama, when he killed, many people, including the Libyan head of state, Muammar Gaddafi. They also orchestrated to kill the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, who was turned to his own people. And who also can forget that the CIA, they eliminated the first coup d'etat and attempt to kill one of the African leaders, Patrice Emery Lumumba, in 1961, when they installed Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu wa Zambanga and controlled that region. From now, Congo DRC has never been the same. And when you look at their influence in terms of preaching democracy, yes, we are hosting Zambia here in Lusaka. We're going to be hosting the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, and many people are questioning how and why the United States of America come in to proclaim or teach us democracy in the country, looking at their history in terms of war and escalation of war in different countries.
I guess the question then must also be asked to South Africa as well, as to why it has chosen to stay, form part of the ICC arrangement, even when it can see that as much as the structure may well be there for a very good reason, how it has operated and how it has chosen, to conduct itself, who forms part of it and who doesn't, is in itself problematic. I know that, after the al-Bashir incident, there were conversations about whether South Africa should continue being part of the structure and what that means.
Well, it's a catch-22 question, and I think I shared this when I was coming to prepare myself for this great interview. United States of America plays a very strategic position in terms of the influence of supporting programs in South Africa. I think they fund close to the tune of $2 billion in terms of health. They've got CDF programs which they are running in South Africa. They've got also PEPFAR and many other programs which they are running in South Africa. And part of the conditions, which are tied, that they must be affiliated to certain institutions or they must sign certain treaties. So it is not by will that the government of South Africa has remained to stay in the ISIS. ISIS has been condemned many, many times and again that it is a bias and it conducts selective prosecution in terms of its mandate. It's not a rigid institution which was founded that it shall provide that judiciary arm according to the Rome Treaty. It has become an instrument that has been used by those who would like to influence the nations. And I hope one day that South Africa will realize who its friends are. We mustn't forget what President Nelson Mandela said, that your enemies are not our enemies. And I think they've kept on that declaration for quite some time. But the question is, for how long can they stay into that position? We can see as well the United States of America has issued some warning to the South African government in terms of their position with Russia.
And that how long will continue to be asked whenever these contradictions swirl?
Yes, yes, indeed. I think it will reach at the point that, many countries now have to relook at or renegotiate their relationships, especially South African relationship with the United States of America. They have to reconsider in terms of the bilateral relationships, what treaties they have signed. And when they call for the world peace, do they stick to the world peace? I think South Africa has been in a very good position in terms of positioning itself in terms of the world peace. We can see its allies, India, Russia, they have sided themselves, and as well as to the Chinese. And I think these are the majority. United States of America has just got a big mouth. I'm sorry to say that, but their influence shall come to an end sooner or later. That these wars which are happening across the world, the rest of the African continent shall rise up and say no to things such as this, because it brings up not every good aspects of good leadership or democracy as we have built over the years.
What do you think will be the consequences for South Africa when it doesn't arrest Vladimir Putin when he arrives here for that BRICS summit?
Well, the consequences is to relook at the funding mechanism model that I just spoke to. They will threaten to cut that. And as well as they will try to now institute a war against President Cyril Ramaphosa, to go to the people to rise against him. This has been the case in terms of if governments or head of states and government, they do not listen to United States of America agenda. They go to the people to rise up against their elected president. We can't forget as well the death of John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania, who was eliminated not long ago during the COVID pandemic. The consequences is very, 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 stiff, and cannot be afforded. As the United States of America and South Africa has enjoyed both bilateral relations and as well as trade relations between the two countries. I think what we can simply say from this end that can we be so wise and have adult supervisions for these world leaders, to sit down in the room and decide what is best for them. Yes, the United States of America does not conform to any agenda of any nation in the world. The only agenda they conform to is an American dream. And an American dream is not a South African dream. An American dream is not a Zambian dream. An American dream is not the Ukraine dream. And all these are the things that is happening in the world.
Dr. Sangala, thank you so much for your time and insights.
It's a pleasure having me.
He's an international relations expert. The question, of course, is going to continue to be asked to arrest Vladimir Putin or not to arrest him when he arrives here for that BRICS summit. We'll see how this one pans out. The South African government has, of course, sought legal advice on how to proceed on this one. We will see what that advice says and how this story pans out. For tonight, though, we've come to the end of the show. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time.